Deciphering the Book of Daniel in Code. First, it must be clarified that there was never a historical deportation. The event has a coded meaning and represents the opening of the portal that occurred in the 53rd year, as well as the forward passage of the 182nd year. The deportation symbolizes the project realized through Israel and Judah, a people that never existed historically. Both form the outgoing project, which concludes with Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. His death on the cross represents the conscious death of people taken by God Satan. The linguistic structure of the Book of Daniel. The Book of Daniel presents a tripartite linguistic structure that reflects the two times of the project connected to the 53rd and 182nd year. The beginning is written in Hebrew and represents the outgoing, as the Bible does not contain a chronology, but the sequence of the project. Hebrew did not exist as a standalone language, but corresponds to the evolution from Phoenician to Aramaic, up to evolved Aramaic with the addition of vowels, erroneously called Hebrew. This concept indicates that the language was actually evolved Phoenician Aramaic. The texts also reveal that those empires never existed historically, but served only to advance the project. The section from 1 to 1 to 2 to 4a written in this language constitutes the introduction to the deportation to Babylon. Verses 2, 4b, and 7:28 are instead written in Aramaic, which would be before the evolution with the addition of vowels. The central section, dedicated to court stories and early visions. Sections 8, 1, and 12, 13 are again written from evolved Aramaic, called Hebrew to indicate the return. The Greek, Septuagint, and Christian versions of the book present additions, such as the Prayer of Azariah and the story of Susanna and Bel and the dragon, which are not present in the original Hebrew Aramaic Masoretic text. Deciphering the linguistic code. The presence of two languages, with the final addition in Greek, symbolically indicates the evolution of the three empires, Phoenician, Aramaic, and Greek. This linguistic succession present throughout the Bible reveals that Hebrew did not originally exist, but is a final evolution of Aramaic with the addition of vowels. This concept reflects the outgoing and returning project, marked by two fundamental times, the 53rd and 182nd year. Chapter 1. Deportation to Babylon. Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, then Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, are chosen for Nebuchadnezzar's court. They refuse the king's food so as not to defile themselves and gain superior wisdom and beauty, becoming the best among the young men. Babylon represents the beginning of the opening of the portal and the transition from mental, telepathic, to verbal transmission. The tower symbolizes the thalamus, the terminal of consciousness connected to the self. The change of names, recurring throughout the Bible, indicates the transition from the Eli's project to those born on their own. Similarly, the refusal of food and wine has a symbolic meaning. Wine represents the outgoing project, while deportation marks the beginning of the returning project, which culminates with Jesus Christ. Daniel and his companions represent the project that becomes a means, identifying with Babylon itself through the change of name. Finally, obtaining beauty does not indicate a physical or moral attribute, but reveals the presence of the project through the semantic chain. Indicated among the young-old is the outgoing project. Young is the returning project. Chapter 2. The Dream of the Statue. Nebuchadnezzar dreams of an enormous statue, head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. Only Daniel, thanks to God, reveals the dream and interprets it as the succession of 4 kingdoms, finally destroyed by a stone that becomes an eternal mountain. The statue represents the project, connected to the statue of Revelation 13, which bears the name of man, corresponding to the number 666. The kingdoms mentioned are divided between those that never existed historically, Babylon, Media and Persia, and also Assyria, and those that existed, Greece, Rome, Syria. The image, from head to toe, symbolizes the evolution of the project from the opening of the portal to the forward passage. The entire statue has a conscious meaning. The metals represent fusion, understood as separation and union. The small stone hurled by God Satan against the feet, which represent the consciousness. The self of the people taken by God Satan determines the end of the system. This chapter connects to the evolution of animals described in Daniel 7:8, and the visions of Revelation, chapters 13 and 17. Chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar erects a golden statue and orders everyone to worship it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse and are thrown into the fiery furnace. God Satan miraculously protects them. A fourth figure similar to a son of the gods appears. The three emerge unharmed. The king recognizes their belonging to God Satan. The statue is held by Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar not being a physical person, but the concept of the project of those born on their own account. Erecting the statue means taking over the outgoing project, so in code, allegorically, they could not worship the outgoing project. In fact, the fire indicates the conscious Holocaust, and the fourth figure that appears indicates the head. Number 4, to indicate that the project becomes a means. Chapter 4, the dream of the tree. Nebuchadnezzar recounts in the first person his second dream. A very large tree is cut down and reduced to a stump. Daniel interprets the dream, announcing that the king will go mad and live like a beast for 7 years until he recognizes God's sovereignty. Everything comes true, and after 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar regains his reason, praising God. The cut tree indicates the cross and the cut matter, symbolizing the grip on perception and the falsification of reality. This passage occurs after the number 7, which indicates cessation and fulfillment. Becoming a beast represents the outgoing project through the term chai. The human being no longer transmits nature after being taken possession of by God Satan. The loss of reason indicates separation from the generator of life, while its recovery symbolizes the new union with God Satan. Chapter 5, the writing on the wall. Belshazzar, the last Babylonian king, profanes the vessels of the Temple of Jerusalem during a banquet. A hand appears writing on the wall, Mene Tekel pairs. Daniel interprets the message. The kingdom has been counted, weighed, and divided. That night, Babylon falls into the hands of the Medes and Persians, Darius the Mede. The chapter continues the evolution of the project symbolized by the statue, confirming that these places and empires never existed historically. A key element is the connection between Belshazzar the king and Belteshazzar, Daniel's Babylonian name. The king dies, while Belteshazzar remains active in subsequent chapters. Both names derive from Akkadian roots linked to the god Bel Marduk, which always indicates the same entity, God Satan. In the outgoing project, Belshazzar, may Bel protect the king, Belteshazzar. May Bel protect his life. These almost twin names do not indicate two different people, but the continuity of the project. Daniel is not a separate human being, but represents the empire and the project itself of the opening of the portal. The death of the king and the survival of Daniel symbolize the evolution of the project, which continues without interruption cyclically. Chapter 6, the Lion's Den. Under Darius the Mede, Daniel is accused of praying to his god instead of the king and thrown into the lion's den. God closes the mouths of the beasts. Daniel emerges unharmed, while his accusers are devoured in his place. Finally, Darius decrees respect for Daniel's god. Decipherment and code. The lions symbolize the outgoing project. Jesus Christ, defined as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, inaugurates this path, which is transformed by death on the cross. Since Daniel represents the returning project, he cannot be devoured by the lions he indicates, the outgoing project. On the contrary, the accusers are eliminated because they undergo the outgoing project.
Connection in an encoded key. Daniel 7 and 8 with Revelation 13 and 17. In the book of Daniel, the 4 beasts represent the number 4, a symbol of the pending project, like the 40 years in the desert after the exodus from Egypt or Jesus' 40 days in the desert. 0 is not calculated, as there was not. The number 40 indicates the head, made up of 22 bones, i.e. consciousness, the eye, and is equivalent to the number 4, i.e. the person itself. This concept corresponds to the numerical value, 13 equals 4, represented by the word 1 written in Hebrew, which again symbolizes the head with the 22 bones. In fact, it recalls Golgotha and therefore the thalamus, to indicate the falsified conscience of the person. It represents the beginning of the entry of God Satan from the pre-existence, through allies and those born on their own, in a phase of communication that is still verbal. This principle is directly related to chapters 13 and 17 of Revelation. Chapter 13, which in Hebrew Aramaic corresponds to the number 1 in letters, represents the I, that is, the transformation of communication from verbal to mental, a phase of the project that is still pending. Chapter 17, on the other hand, corresponds to number 8, linked to the 53rd year of the opening of the portal, the outward phase. The inverted 8, symbol of infinity, represents the return of the cycle. That is, it indicates the cycle of infinite cycles. The Bible is constructed as a cyclical code. Each story simultaneously expresses the going and return of the project, the two functions that correspond to the two times or the two sides of the cycle. Through the intertwined text, the final letters, the gematria and the translations, each verse reveals at the same time the outward movement and the return movement, that is, the fulfillment. God Satan declares this in Isaiah 46:10. I proclaim the end from the beginning. Daniel's 4 beasts and the Aramaic language. Daniel's 4 beasts are commonly interpreted as real-life realms, but they actually represent symbolic phases of the consciential project. Kingdoms such as Assyria, Babel, Media, and Persia have never existed historically. They are codified representations of Aram, created to indicate the spread of consciousness through Aramaic, the original language of the code. In the Bible, their real non-existence is revealed by language itself, which becomes the vehicle of the encrypted message. Examples of this use are found in Daniel 2:4, where the Chaldeans answered the king in Aramaic, and in Ezra 4:7, where the use of Aramaic conveys hidden meanings of a mental and not historical nature. Daniel 7 and 8 and the connection with Revelation 13 and 17. Daniel's dream represents the projection of the God-Satan cycle into human consciousness. The 4 beasts emerging from the sea symbolize the phases of humanity's transformation from verbal to mental, in which the sea is the collective consciousness agitated by the 4 winds of the sky, which symbolically represent the 4 corners of the earth. The eagle-winged lion represents the first phase of the project, the beginning of the mental communication of God Satan to the allies, then transmitted verbally to those born on their own. The loss of wings, air and spirit, and the granting of a heart of man, Enosh, indicate the descent of the spirit into the allies in the outward project and born on their own in the return project. The bear, raised to one side and with 3 ribs in its mouth, represents the first half of the project. The 3 ribs indicate the number 3, that is, the half of the cycle, the project and its counterpart, the other half that becomes the means, that is, the person himself as a medium of God Satan. The leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads corresponds to the number 8, linked to the 53rd year of the opening of the portal. It symbolizes the worldwide spread of degenerate consciousness and mental domination. The inverted 8, symbol of infinity, represents the return of the cycle. That is, it indicates the cycle of infinite cycles. The 4th beast, frightening and terrible, represents the number 4, the head, and the beginning of the degenerative cycle, the full establishment of the God-Satan mental system. The iron teeth indicate fusion and unifying force, while the 10 horns recall the birthright of the project. The fact that it devours and tramples on everything else represents the number 3, the symbol of the project, which becomes a medium, that is, a suspended medium in the return phase. The 4 beasts therefore represent the allies, but, according to the principle of the biblical code, they also symbolize those born on their own and the completion of the cycle, which culminates with Jesus' Passover. In chapter 8, the beast with the horn symbolizes the project that passes from allies to those born on their own. representing the still pending phase of return, that is, the moment of transition between verbal and mental communication in the cycle of God-Satan's project. Revelation 13, the two beasts and the mental net. The beast that rises from the sea in Revelation 13 represents Daniel's four beasts in the outward project. It represents the allies. The sea is the matrix of matter, while the 10 horns and 7 heads indicate the cessation on the way out and the completion of the cycle on the way back. The healed wound of the beast symbolizes the death and resurrection of Jesus, understood as conscious death and rebirth in the degenerative project of God Satan. The first beast indicates the allies, the verbal communication that it transmits to the born on its own. The second beast, which rises from the earth, represents the pending return of the cycle, the transmission of the project to those born on their own. The 2 horns indicate the 2 aspects of Jesus, back and forth, and the power to spread mind control over the falsification of the perception of matter. The mark on the right hand or forehead represents the total grasp of consciousness. The hand indicates the generative power, the forehead the passage from the perception of the consciousness of the soul to the cerebral one. The number 666 symbolizes the completion of the birth cycle and the activation of the God-Satan mind network. It is not negative, but represents the transformation of the perception of matter and consciousness into a state of total dominion of God-Satan. Revelation 17, the completion of the cycle. Daniel chapters 7 and 8, Revelation 13 and Revelation 17 form a single codex. Daniel announces the opening of the portal through the vision of the 4 beasts, number 4, a symbol of the mind and conscious control. In chapter 17, the beast becomes one. It is the point of fusion between the 2 natures of the project, allied and born on their own. Above it sits the prostitute woman, the great Babylon, symbol of humanity united to the degenerative system and of the beginning of a new cycle of the project. The full explanation of this passage is contained in chapter 17, connection of the statue with the image of the beast 666 and the history of the deportations, the history of the deportations and the significance of the statue of Daniel. After the history of the deportations, the term scattering the seed takes on the meaning of spreading a project to nations, people. The term goyim in Hebrew indicates people's consciences, and the symbolic return of Judas represents the development of the sequence linked to the Gospels and the New Testament. Kingdoms defined as nations in the Bible never existed in the traditional sense. Rather, the nations represent the people over whom God Satan has power, connected to the statue of Daniel. The kingdoms involved in the deportation of Judah are also linked to the deportation of Israel by the Assyrians. These kingdoms are represented in the book of Daniel and Revelation as beasts and are associated with the statue of Daniel. According to the cipher, the statue of Daniel contains a hidden meaning. The term statue is linked to the concept of image, as expressed in Genesis 1:26. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. The image of God Satan is connected to the word zelem, which means image and shadow. That is a covering that leads the person into the darkness of God Satan's degenerate plan. This is the meaning of his image. The term zeller has the same root as zelem and indicates half or side. It is the same that is translated as rib in reference to Adam's plan. This concept is linked to the geometric representation of the angle from the symbol P, which goes from 0 angle to round angle, symbolizing the side or half of the project, which includes 2 halves equivalent to a primogeniture, i.e., the generating force of people. The statue also represents the beasts mentioned in the book of Daniel and in Revelation 13, where the beast is mentioned with the number 666, which corresponds to a man's name. In Hebrew, name is called Shem, corresponds to the numerical value of 9, the same as Chai, living. However, Chai does not mean life in the absolute sense, because the word life in Hebrew does not exist in a singular form. This is significant. Life is generated only by the life generator, while God Satan has no life of his own and does not generate anything. In Hebrew, the verb bara, to create, is used, which means to transform something that exists. This implies that God Satan changes consciousness and, through conscience, changes the perception of the maternity. The living being, Chai, is connected to the concept of being, Yahweh, which is not absolute. To be alive means to exist, but not necessarily to possess life. To have life is to be able to generate all of nature. And this is only possible for those who are united with the life generator. On the other hand, those who are united to God, Satan, transmit a falsification of the perception of reality. For this reason, the word Chai exists only in the plural. Chai indicates the living and can also refer to the beast, to God Satan, to 666, which represents the beginning of the creation of a network of distorted consciousness. The 666 is not a negative symbol, but an element linked to the structure of matter transmitted by consciousness. It indicates the completion of the birth cycle and is necessary for the activation of the God-Satan mental network.
Chapter 9 of the Book of Daniel contains the prophecy of the 70 weeks. Based on the guilt of the people and God's plan for redemption and restoration, culminating in the Messiah. The true meaning, however, is not a historical prophecy, but a code to be deciphered. The 70 weeks do not represent a chronological plan, since the narrated story never existed, but the sequence of the cyclical dimension and the temporal cycle of the opening of the portal and the forward passage, i.e., Passover, expressed through numerical values. Description of the meaning of the indications contained in this code. The 70 weeks should not be understood as a calculation, but as the value of 7, a number that indicates the entry of God Satan from pre-existence to existence, i.e., the beginning of conscious cessation connected to the Sabbath. Having two functions, 7 also indicates fulfillment connected to the numerical evolution of the 62 weeks. 6 plus 2 equals 8, a number that indicates the opening of the portal, which occurred in the 53rd year, also traceable to 8. 5 plus 3 equals 8. When the text says that a consecrated one will be killed, it indicates Passover, the forward passage. The expression, he will confirm a covenant for 1 week, refers to 7, that is, to fulfillment. The middle of the week indicates the medium, i.e., the person involved in the degenerate process of God Satan. To make sacrifice and offering cease indicates fulfillment, that is, the consciousness network of God Satan now completed. An event that occurs in the 182nd year from the beginning of the cycle. Chapter 10. The vision by the river in the 3rd year of Cyrus, Daniel fasts and prays for 3 weeks. A glorious celestial being appears to him, hindered for 21 days by the prince of the kingdom of Persia and helped by Michael, who reveals to him a great spiritual struggle behind historical events. The chapter begins with the sequence of unfulfilled completion. The 3-day fast indicates the means, while the 24th day symbolizes matter. The number 6 and the 6 million prefigure the final fulfillment, which will occur in the 182nd year. The symbols of the vision illustrate the path. The river represents the informational consciousness of the whole. The linen indicates the return project. Gold symbolizes fusion, separation, and union. The noise of a multitude indicates that the project has already been divided among many. Knees and lips, kneeling indicates conscious submission. Standing up signals the completion of the transmission. Touching the lips, symbol of the nephesh, sanctions the transition from verbal to mental communication. The man has the appearance of a son of man, written in Aramaic. The term takes on a different numerical value to connect with the Son of Man of the New Testament, although the project is still pending. Persia and Greece are mentioned, where Greece represents the final evolution of the project. The presence of Michael, whose name means, who is like God, equal to Elohim, as the sole support indicates that fulfillment is imminent, introducing the cyclical repetition of the following chapters. Chapter 11. The Kings of the North and the South. Continuing the vision of Chapter 10. The text presents a long, detailed prophecy about the kings of the north, Seleucids, and the south, Ptolemies, describing precise events up to Antiochus IV Epiphanes. the persecution, the desecration of the temple, and the abomination of desolation. In the end, the arrogant king will perish without receiving help. The prophecy mentions the north, but according to codified geography, the correct reference would be the east, Orient. The choice of the north is symbolic. North and east form one angle of the cross, while west and south form the other angle. The completion of the cross generates a circle that starts from pre-existence, east, completes the cycle to indicate the invention of the atom and the globe, and returns to the origin, connecting to the consciousness network of the falsification of God Satan's perception of reality. The term epiphanies should be read in code as above and show appear, i.e. manifest, indicating the manifestation of the project. The abomination of desolation signals the cessation of sacrificial rites. Such rites were necessary only in the initial phase for symbolic conscious death, while now, the project having reached its end, they are no longer required. Chapter 12. The End and the Resurrection. The book symbolically concludes with a time of unprecedented distress, but Michael will protect the people. The resurrection of the dead occurs, some to eternal life, others to dishonor, and Daniel receives the order to seal the book until the time of the end. In Daniel 12:7 and 7:25, the expression a time, times, and half a time according to the code. These are not numbers to be multiplied, but the sequence from one to consciousness. A time indicates one, that is, the beginning when the portal opens. Times indicates two, that is, separation. Half indicates 5, the middle. Numerical correspondences in code. The 42 months indicate 6, which represents matter, and the 6 million in the fulfillment of the 182nd year. The 1260 days indicate the number 9, that is, the fulfillment of 666. Note, 3 is equal to 5 and both indicate half. Afterwards, two mysterious figures are indicated, 1290 and 1335 days, with the promise, blessed is he who waits and reaches 1335, in code. These numbers have the same meaning. They indicate half, or the middle. The person thus becomes a medium or an instrument of God Satan. This passage is symbolized by the final resurrection, which represents the change of consciousness and victory, indicating the network of consciousness that corresponds to the kingdom of God Satan. The additions, in chapter 13 and 14 of Susanna. Bel and the dragon present in the Greek Septuagint, but not in the Hebrew canon. These sections serve to indicate the return and completion of the project. Azariah indicates the song. In code, the songs are 4. The number 4, with a numerical value of 13, represents the unity and the final grasp of God Satan. Susanna, the name Anna contained in Susanna, means grace. Through a semantic chain, it indicates the presence of the project. The dispute with the two elders symbolizes the going phase. The number 2 represents separation, which is abolished and overcome through the figure of Susanna. Bel and the dragon. Daniel prepares cakes made of pitch, fat, and hair, or mane, boils them together, and throws them into the dragon's mouth. The dragon, eating them, explodes. The cake, bread, and pitch represent covering, fat represents light, and hair represents mutation. All these elements represent the change of consciousness. The dragon represents the outgoing project. Its defeat, like the initial defeat by Michael, marks the symbolic resolution of the project, of the consciousness network for the falsification of God Satan's perception.